Hey everyone, welcome back. We are here with attorney Vera Zambrano once again. This is part six of our criminal justice series. And it's my pleasure to have Vera back on the show. And for those of you that have missed some of our previous episodes, I'll tell you guys just a little bit about who she is. She's an international attorney practicing law primarily in the US and in Europe, in different legal matters area and specialties, right? She's also a member of the German Bar Association and the German American Lawyers Association. She is a member of the International Bar Association, as well as a member of the South Florida Professionals Association. And that's just to name a few, right? So, Vera, welcome back on the show. It's a pleasure to have you
Thank you so much,
here once
Armand.
again.
Thank you so
Absolutely.
much. Hope you're
And how
doing
are you?
great.
Doing well, busy, busy, busy. Like we were just talking a minute ago, just yeah, it's a busy time. So, how's your practice?
Yes, very good. A lot of work, a lot of cases. Always, doing the best we can. And yeah, it's going great. It's going great.
Cool. Awesome. So let's jump right into this. So in today's show, we'll be discussing the complexities of movements like the Black Lives Matter movement and defund the police on the criminal justice system. Very controversial, very difficult subject to talk about. So as far as to get us started, right? So the Black Lives Matter movement and the defund the police movements have driven significant social awareness, and they brought about some positive changes. But these movements have also been associated with several negative effects and challenges, which have been points of heated contention and division, right, in public debates and within our society. So that's the topic we're going to be talking about. And Vera, I'd like to start off by asking you, what are your thoughts and what is your perspective on the fact that some cities that reduced, right, police budgets in response to the defund the police movement experienced increases in certain types of crimes, such as homicides and other violent crimes. Critics have argued that these increases, right, in crimes are partially linked to the reduce the police, this movement of defunding police. But I'd like to go and just kind of get us started right there. What are your thoughts on this, Vera?
Yeah, so when we look at, law enforcement, like the police, right, when we talk about it, we have to see that the police is a public institution, right? It is
Mhm.
supposed to be, a protection for every civilian, right? To protect their constitutional rights and the civil rights, right? And they're not supposed to overstep their legal duties, right? There is like, we have a law in place, we have like a lot of like several laws in place, right?
Right.
And they're not, they have certain catalogs, right? What they're supposed to do, what they're not supposed to do. And they have to, enforce their duties within their power and not overstep, right? When we talk about those, all those cases that happened, right? Like in beginning, George Floyd 2020, right? Like 4 years
Mhm.
ago already.
Right.
We see a big discussion, right? Publicly about what was going on, right? Where are the problems? Are these institutional problems? Are these individual problems? Are these, common problems of the country itself? Or do we have to look more detailed into it, right? So yeah, what I said, that the police is only supposed to act within the laws. And if we have, overstepping of the law, every civilian, which a lot of people might know, maybe others don't, right? They can actually file legal action, right, against that certain police officer afterwards, right? So the problem that we see is situations can escalate because in that moment, in that heat of the moment, we have humans, right, acting, right? The police officer is a human being, and the person that is, gets stopped or whatever happens is a human being, right? So humans make mistakes, right? So we have to also look at, what was happening in that specific situation and could have been prevented in the first place, or was it something that has a deeper underlying issue, right? Something institutionalized, like a lack of training, right? A lack of care, maybe even, right? Or is it really, are there really fundamental problems like, racism or, all sorts of discrimination, right? So it's not that easy to say, defund the police, which is by, mistaken also. Defund the police doesn't mean we abolish the power of the police, right, and we take away all the financial means of the police, it's meant to reallocate, right, certain funds and certain financial aspects to other parts in the community, right? So it's not to just take away money from the police departments and to make them smaller, but it's more to empower other, institutions in the community, right? And social workers, healthcare workers, to make them more powerful to connect with the civilians, right?
Right. So I have a question for you, right? And I'll preface it by giving you kind of an example of something that we've seen here in Utah, right? Where some years back, right, there was a police department here that was they were caught red-handed, right? They were doing all sorts of illegal things, right? The name of the city is West Valley. I think it's the Valley City Police Department. They were planting, evidence, and this is seen across the nation. This is not unique to Utah or West Valley, right? And they were doing all sorts of illegal stuff, right? So right, the natural response is, well, you hold them accountable, but then we've also seen that that doesn't always work, right? You try to hold, them accountable, and then a jury refuses to hold them accountable. What are your thoughts on that? How do you balance that out? I mean, do you know what I'm saying? Like it's because
Yeah.
it's so real easy to say, yeah, if they, if there are some rotten apples, you hold them accountable, which is true, right? That's the right way to go about it. But what's
Yes.
the solution to situations where, and this is a very old case, right? To re-emphasize my point, but do you remember the Rodney King
Yes.
beating that happened in
Yeah.
in Los Angeles in California? So I was uh, uh, an adolescent at the time when that happened, and that happened, down the street from where I lived. So
Mhm.
it's one of those things where I agree with you, but what's the solution to situations where accountability is just an illusion?
Yeah, so when we look at, when you say, okay, the results of a trial may not be what the public is expecting, right? It may not be, satisfying to all, the riots or to what we expect in the public, right? We have to see that the legal action is only a part of it, right? Where I would, start, begin with is prevention, right? How can we minimize and reduce those kind of cases, violence, if it is, like wrongful violence, right, or overstepping legal duties in the first place. So where do those problems come from? So you look at probably like George Floyd, the best example, right? The officers in place, there were not only one officer, right? It's when you saw the footage, there were like a couple of officers, right? Several officers. And you can clearly see that it was a combination of different things, a combination of different mistakes, right? A lack of
Hmm.
training, that it was like the heat, as I said, the heat of the moment.
Hmm.
They were like concerned, worried. No one was really, felt safe at that time, right? They didn't know what to do. They didn't know what to expect, right? Um, and there was just a lack of training, as you can clearly see, right? And I don't want to, say anything that I cannot be confident about, right? If there was racism in place or not, that someone else has to decide on that, right? But it surely was an overwhelming situation for those officers too, which should have not been the case because this is their job every single day, right? So lack of training, then it was a lack of understanding. It was certainly a collision of, culture, right? There was not enough understanding there. There was not enough clarification in the first place, right? The action was taken too fast and too hard, of course, right? So there should have been what I say, like more prevention in the first place. That means
Hmm.
a better work in the communities, right? More also mixed police officers, right? So, for example, we have in Miami Beach, there is like it's not the law, but it is also that in certain Latin communities, Black communities, you have actually Latin and Black officers, right? So why is that? Why? And that's not a coincidence. So that is an intention to try to build a bridge between between the public and between law enforcement. You cannot send someone into a Black community that is like only white officers, right? Because you're provoking certain situations, or you might not be aware of certain underlying issues so much. So it's highly recommended to be aware of that as well. So to work with them in the first place, right? And to be
Yeah.
the helper that you should be as a police officer.
And Vera, you've touched on a lot of interesting points, and there's so many different things. And I was smiling because there's so many different things I'd love to be able to kind of ask you some follow-up questions on. But we're going to pick just the very last point that you were just talking about, right? And sorry for the interruption. I just want to make sure that because you touch on so many interesting things, and we only have so much time, so I want to make sure that I get to ask you those questions. So you were talking about that last aspect of it, but see, I'd love to push back and get your reaction to this, right? I'd say it doesn't matter, what race they are. I'd say you have racist Black officers, and I say racist, not racist, forget the word racist. You have Black officers, police officers, and Hispanic officers, Latino police officers that are unjust, that abuse their power, and you see it all the time. I agree with you that is not, you'd want to, right, kind of follow some of the suggestions you gave, but I'd like to push back on that a little bit because and not to go off on a tangent, right, but you have so if you wanted to use the George Floyd example, right, you had officers there that were of different ethnicities, and it didn't make a difference. Or if we want to use something that, like I said, not to go off on a tangent, but you have, for example, situations like there's a trial going on, high profile trial. The Young Thug is his artistic name. I don't know what his real name is right now, but I can't think of his name right now. But where you had a Black judge, right? And I made some content on this, right? African American judge completely like taking advantage of his power, and he's violating basic fundamental like canons, right, that are required of judges. So I'd love to get your feedback on, like, your thoughts and perspective on that, because I think that you still have very, irrespective of their race, I think you still have individuals, right, with too much power, no accountability, and it doesn't matter what race they are. I think but what's your take on that?
Yes. So when we look at the problem here, in my opinion, is a lack of training, and also a lack in education, right? Like when you look at what police officers have to go through, like in theory and in practice, right? It is not enough time to really get best education out of it. So because the problem is, when you're wearing guns, you're carrying guns, right, every day, and you have so much power also, right? It's highly dangerous, right, when you're not educated well, or when you miss out on certain programs and certain trainings because of the time. The time a police officer gets trained is not very long. In Europe, it's much longer, for example, right? So they have to go through, several years of training. Then, they have practice training, and they also have to practice a lot more, in shooting, in how to prevent shooting, right? How to take advantage of other things like the taser, for example, right? Other things that are not, lethal, right, or deadly in a certain situation, right? So that is what I see is a big difference in between Europe and the US. European officers are usually they should, and they have to, regarding the law, they have to take the mildest and the least lethal measure in a certain situation. It's not in the US. In the US, it's just how do you get rid of the danger, right? No matter if the person could die or not, right? You don't have to actually shoot someone in the leg. In Europe, you would have to do that. You have to shoot somewhere, arms, legs, where the person cannot die. That's a big difference, right? So we see that it's, I believe that it's a lack of, time that you have in certain programming for police officers. So I'm not going to say that it's a problem that we have too many people that are taking advantage of power or are power hungry, right? Because it's a mixed group of professionals, right? So you cannot really say you find more people who are power hungry in the police force. I wouldn't go that far, but the problem is, how do you deal with people that are in certain situations not certain, right? Overreact or abuse their power, clearly, right?
Yeah. And I agree with you that I think training is part of it. I don't think it's all training, but I think definitely is part of it. Because just as to take what you just gave as an example, right? You said in Europe, people are, police officers are trained that if it's safe to do so, right? That if it's not going to be an issue to shoot somebody in the leg, where here it's customary, right? To shoot somebody, it's what's the training is 2 to the chest, 1 to the head, right? That's the training that police officers receive, and in fact, that's more maybe of a self-defense training. And the police officers might be just straight to the chest, right? 2, 3 shots to the chest. That's kind of the way that they're trained. And I'm not an expert on this, but yeah, I could see how that definitely plays a role. But something you touched on as well, I think it's the psychology, the training of the mindset, right? What's the mindset? Am I trying to, right? We talk about valuing life, right? The value of life. You hear this all the time, right? In the legal system. But then when it comes to actually enforcing the laws, it's almost like that goes out the wayside, and it's just like you violate the law,
Yeah.
and it's like your life means nothing now because you violate the law. But what are your thoughts on that?
So I believe you can, in this point, in this aspect, you cannot really compare, the U.S. with other Western societies, because you have a different constitution, right? The right to carry weapons and also to use them, right, is fundamentally different from European constitutions, where you don't have that right at all, right? So you see, the person that is getting attacked, if it's a police officer or a civilian, you don't have to choose the mildest form to defend yourself, right? You just have to try to get rid of the attack, right, and try to get out of the situation. So it's fundamentally different, like the psychological aspect. So what I think leads to so much more violence, or so much more cases like we've seen in the US, is what I believe, like, you can tell me your opinion, that's the lack of training, as I said, the lack of time they have to actually assess the situation, and also to train them in other aspects of the law, to say, okay, every human being has to be protected in the first place, right? Even if there's a danger in place, you have to eliminate the danger, and there has to be standing above elimination of life, right? It has to be disconnected, right?
Yeah.
So a single act, a criminal act, is not ultimately like connected to the person's life, right? You have to get rid of the attack, but you have to try to still save the person's life, because what police officers are, what the first priority is, to help to protect the public and to protect life, and not to eliminate life, right? So that's also a big aspect when you think about it, right? You have to protect every civilian's life in the first place.
Right.
So even if it's an attacker or a criminal or a suspect, let it just be a suspect. No one knows in the moment if it's going to be the defendant in the trial, right? Later on, it's just a suspect in the beginning.
Right.
So that's why, as long as a judge or a jury has not determined the person is guilty on a certain crime, this person is only a suspect, right? And shooting a person, right, with the consequences, the person might die, and then later on it was a mistake. The person was not who the police officer thought he was. There was a miscommunication. The person was actually not the person that was what the police was looking for. There was also incidents, right? The person shot someone, but it was actually not the person that was a target in the first place, right? So we have to look at very careful, how are these people trained, and how can they go through like a more intense training psychologically, and also socially, right? They have to, because you live in a society that is so diverse in the US, a lot more diverse than in any other country, right? So you have to be able to disconnect your own belief system from your profession and how you actually execute your daily duties.
Yeah, yeah. No, yeah, I love that we landed here on this whole training on the psychology of how to approach situations and the psychology, working on the psychology, right, of a police officer, because they really, in our society, they have so much power. I mean, they walk around with the ability to be able to, in a split second, take anybody's life. And how can we not invest more time and energy and resources into training them mentally to use that power responsibly, right? I mean, in a sense, if you think about it, I mean, in a lot of ways, I don't even know how else to put it, right? That they are so powerful. They have the right. Right? Like you and I cannot carry around a gun visibly, and in Texas it might be different. In Utah, you have a concealed carry permit, but in general, you can't just walk around with a gun and willy-nilly decide to shoot somebody of your own free will, like of your own free discretion, right? There's all these laws that bound you, and with them, they have so much more discretion, right? Tons of discretion. Um, and they could take somebody's life in a split second, like I said, at any point, like if they choose to. And we really should be putting more time and energy into training them psychologically how to look at that power, how to use that power, how to be more responsible with it. And most do, right? Most do, right? In all fairness, most police
Yes.
officers are good police officers, and they do
Yes.
that. Yeah.
Yes, exactly what you said. It's when people say, it is a problem with the institution, law enforcement, I would be very careful to say that. Of course, we have history in certain states, like you said, like mentioned California, where we like LAPD, right? They have certain, historical events that make it even, more difficult to really think there's not an institutional problem, right? Not a fundamental problem. But also you have to look at if there's a rotten apple, it's just way more consequential, right? There are a lot more consequences. Um, for example, if in another profession you have someone that is acting racist or overstepping their duties, that person might get fired. That person might get, not given a second chance, right? To actually repeat that, or there are more like harsher consequences for this person, right?
Mhm.
Or also this person is not carrying a gun at all. So even then, it's of course it's bad in every profession, right? If there's discrimination, but the consequences are different because a police officer might take someone's life, right?
Right.
In a millisecond. And in other professions, it's not about life or death, right?
Yep. Yeah.
So there might be racism as well, but you can actually sue someone, right, for that, and you get compensation, or the person ends up with, a criminal charge, and no one's life is in danger or is taken away. That's a big
Yeah.
difference.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And a question for you. I mean, and it's a tough, right, to look at the opposing side of this argument, right? Like people want to live in safety communities, right? They want to be able to walk down the street and not be mugged, not have somebody come and attack them, right? So if we look at that side of it and we look at their perspective for just a moment, would you say, because I get comments on some of the content, the short form content that we post, where it seems to people are implying that it's worth having our basic rights violated, whether it's by police officers or government, in the name of safety, um, which is interesting, right? Now they don't come out and say that, right? But that's what's implied. It's what I mean. I'd love to get your thoughts on that personally. What do you think? Is it worth having our basic fundamental Bill of Rights and other constitutional rights, having all that violated by the government, by police officers, prosecutors, judges, and so forth, in the name of safety? What are your thoughts on that?
No. So when you ask me about, what is more meaningful, it's always the specific case, right? First of all, I would say it's never worth to sacrifice our constitutional rights or the civil rights for public safety, right? Because it is not the goal, right, to have to sacrifice the rights in the first place. Now, when it comes to certain incidents, we have to look at, was it necessary? Was it legally necessary to violate a certain constitutional right, right? Not the rights of the person per se. Certain rights in that moment in order to protect the public or to protect other people's lives or rights,
Mhm.
right? But it's never, there cannot be justification to say people have to sacrifice their constitutional rights, the highest rights that we have in the country, right? And the Constitution is a brilliant framework, right? It was well thought out by experts. It's brilliant. It was copied by a lot of countries. So you should never say you have to just take it, right? You just have to take public safety is more important than someone's rights. No, it's the other way around. Like the government has to protect everyone's rights, right? And has to make sure that we all can live freely, right, and express and act freely to a certain extent. And the limit is where you actually violate someone else's specific right in a certain situation, right? So it's never a general question. It's always what happened in that certain incident where someone's rights were violated, and was it justified because you had to protect someone else's rights or the public? But I believe you have to, like like not speaking only as an attorney, right? But you have to, of course, the civilians' rights, the constitutional rights are the highest that they are in the country, right? And so the public sector, which law enforcement is part of the public sector, they have to make sure to protect every civilian's right and still maintain public safety, right? And protect the public. So it's not one or the other. It has to go hand in hand.
Yeah, yeah, that's interesting. I agree with you completely, right? I think that protecting those fundamental Bill of Rights and fundamental constitutional rights should take precedence, right? Yeah, should take precedence. I agree with you completely. But it's interesting to see that in our society, and it's not just with police officers, just in general. I mean, if you look at something, once again, not to go off on a tangent, but if you look at like our First Amendment right, that is being I mean, it's being shredded, right? It's currently being shredded through, government working with private industry, and it's interesting to see that it's complex. I understand it's complicated, but you see how, right, that's happening. It's our First Amendment right is not what I mean, it's not being protected the way you know, the way that it was intended to be protected, right? But again, back to the police officers, right? You have right? On Fourth Amendment right to protection against illegal search and seizure. That's one of those common ones that we see violated in the name of pursuing quote unquote the bad guys, right? That you see that violated all the times, and it's alleged bad guys because sometimes these individuals that are, like you said, they're suspects. Sometimes they're innocent, they're not guilty. But it's interesting to see that how each of these rights, and I think at a much more rapid pace in recent years, those rights are being attacked and shredded little by little, being chipped away at.
Yeah, that's why it's important, right, to the people to not only vote, right, for certain offices and for certain officials in their local communities or state level and also federal level. It's super important to, if you are really passionate about that, to engage, right, in the community and to say, look, I'm living here, I'm raising even my kids here. I want this to be a safe place in 20, 30 years from now, right? I don't want to, have to be fearful or anxious to live here because the crime just increases over time, or like you have certain anxiety. A lot of people are anxious, right? Because they think they cannot send their kids out anymore. They cannot just walk by themselves at night, right? So that is why it's so important to say, okay, this is important enough for me to engage in the communities, to be part of that, to try to contribute financially or time-wise, right? And to educate, right? To educate all those people that need more education on these topics, to try to be better, right? Because everyone, the thing is, everyone lives in that community. The police officer with his family lives in the community, but also the suspect, right? So,
Right.
and they don't know each other, right? What happens in a year from now, no one knows, right? If we have another incident of that kind of sort, or if we get better over time, no one can really tell. So it's very important that we we do the homework pretty much, right? And we engage and we talk to each other about, you know, where's the problem, right? Where is there miscommunication? Is there just a lack of interest? Is it fundamentally, you know, is it a discrimination problem, right? Or because a lot can be solved through communication, actually. And when you take, like, when the mayor is feeling more responsible in a certain city, right, and it says, we have a problem here, we need to solve it, right? We need more social workers, we need more healthcare workers, we need more people that are willing to make a difference. And there are a lot of people. There are a lot of people that are engaging in communities, right? So I believe you have to do this because you live in a certain area, right? And the law enforcement officer lives in a certain area, and the judge lives in a certain area, right? And you might all be neighbors at some point, or go to the same stores, or go to the same, you know, to the same church, or I don't know, right? It's not that you will not touch base with these people in daily life, right? So we're all community members, and I believe that you have to do the prevention, because looking back and say, okay, everyone can sue someone for illegal action, it's not the right course, right? Because then something happened, someone's life is taken away, or someone's family member had to die in an incident, right? And could have been prevented in the first place.
Right, right. Well, Vera, we could probably continue talking about this for another couple hours, but we're going to go ahead and end it here. Thank you for your thought-provoking comments. I appreciate it as always. It's been a pleasure. Vera, if somebody wanted to get a hold of you, if they needed legal representation, you're in Miami, but I know you have other affiliates, right, in other states. But if somebody wanted to get a hold of you, how can they do that?
Yes, so you can Google us, right? A law firm, Vera, Zambrano and Associates. And we have international offices, so you can always call us 7 days a week, 24 hours. If you have an emergency, if you have any inquiries, the website is www.lawyer-berlin-miami.com. And you can find, you know, all the contact information online.
Okay, awesome. Thank you again, Vera. Appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, Herman.